How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. This is the last session that we have in place for the Photo Plus Plus Expo that's going on. So those of you joining us over on Photo Plus Plus, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with Jack and I today to talk about macro photography, live composite, light painting, all those different kinds of styles of photography that we've got. For those of us joining us over on the YouTube channel, thank you for also joining us. We have been doing these sessions for a little over 8 months now, and this has been a really, really fun experience for everybody. So those of you that have followed us over to the Tuesday time frame for this, thank you again. On both platforms, if you guys have questions throughout this session, make sure to tag, if you're over on YouTube, tag at Lumix Cameras, so I can see it on my end here and we can address some of them throughout the presentation. If you're over on the Photo Plus Plus platform, just drop a question either in the chat or in the question panel for the platform there, and we will be happy to address them for you. So we've got some exciting stuff to talk about today. Obviously, as the title slide was indicating, we're going to be talking a lot about macro photography, light painting, and live composite, which are just, obviously macro photography is just a type of photography, but live composite and light painting is something that we're going to talk about in reference to cameras like the G95 and the S5, since they have that live composite functionality in them. I'm going to be joined by Jack Salamanchuk in a few minutes here, so we'll have a really fun conversation about this stuff. And then at the end of the session, when we're probably around 15 minutes before we're scheduled to be done for this, we're actually going to give you guys some info and cover up some of the information about the firmware update that was just released last night. So if you're around for the firmware update, hang tight. We will be talking about it. Otherwise, let us actually kind of get into this conversation. So I want to bring Jack into the conversation here. Hey, Jack, try it again. I'm still getting used to my new setup for unmuting my guests.
Can you hear me now, Sean?
Yes, I can. We can hear you
Thank
now.
you. Thank you. I feel very dignified. Thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be on the other side of Lumix Live.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So for those in the chat that are wondering, Jack is the person who's typically monitoring our questions, providing you guys answers for the things that I can't answer while we're doing this live, or for questions that might be a little more off topic than normal. So it's awesome to have Jack here again. And yeah, so let's kind of jump into it. I know so Jack, you've been on here before, but for those that are new to this platform, or, for any of those that are over on the Photo Plus platform, could you give us background, who you are, what you do for Panasonic?
Well, sure. I'm Jack. I've been with Lumix. I think I am the longest continually serving member of Team Lumix. I've been more than 13 years. I remember a day before the G series. And so... And I can tell you what was so cool about Lumix, and it's kind of grown and changed, is we've always been pioneering and always had cool things. I remember when I was excited about wide-angle lenses, then fast aperture lenses and our point and shoots, all the way to I saw this thing, the G1, and someday I'd say all the time, the G series mirrorless cameras are the future. Now mirrorless cameras are the present, and boy, do we have a lot of options these days, and it's really helped my photography, and that's the thing I really like, is that I look at these all as tools. They're fun tools, but they're still tools. And, I wouldn't want to use just one tool in my toolbox. When you need a screwdriver, a hammer is probably not what you need. So,
you can try, but it's definitely not going to be easy for you.
No, and I find it really confusing, Sean, because I only have one wrench. I don't have a regular wrench and a custom wrench.
Oh, man. All of the corny jokes have started now.
That's menu humor. Thank you very much. It could be a span or two.
Hey, there you go.
But yeah, no, absolutely. But the point is, we've had a lot of great tools, and they do great things. And I've always loved macro photography from a really young age, and it's just so exciting that the things we can do so easily. And even when things don't come out perfectly, there's so much versatility and flexibility that I could never imagine. If you would have told me about focus stacking or post focus 10 years ago, I'd been like, "What? We're layering images in a camera to give me more resolution? What means is this witchcraft possible?" So it's an amazing thing we take for granted.
Yeah. So, yeah, so that kind of, sets the stage, obviously. So, with your kind of focus and pardon the pun there, with your kind of take on macro photography, what kind of equipment from ours do you typically use when you're going out to capture some of this stuff?
Sure, and let me say that a lot of the photography that I do for macro is not studio macro. I can do that I can do that. I have that. I take pictures of microchips. They're really boring. There's a lot of great line detail, but the macro photography that I really enjoy and I like to teach wildlife macro, and that's because I like to go out and get there. I'm gonna do some flowers. I don't like flowers, guys, but I do like flowers with bugs on them, and I do like living creatures because I love that detail. So I have a lot of options I like. My primary camera that I'm using is a G9, but a lot of these times I'll actually use a GX85 because it's small and I can take it with me. To me, that dual stabilization and low pass filter is really what attracts me. Sometimes we get lost in the minutia. See, that's also a macro pun for you, Sean. That we don't focus on the kind of the big stuff that really matters. And to me, a great macro lens or a lens with macro capability, dual stabilization, no optical low pass filter. You give me all those things and I'm really happy no matter which form factor. I also love cameras like the FZ300 because they're weather sealed and like a day like today, it's actually dust and splash resistant. You get close focus really close and I don't have to worry about getting dripped on. And that's a huge issue where I'm in Houston. It's raining all day. So close focus, so like an FZ300. And then the S series obviously is an amazing option. If I'm not using my G9, I'm probably using an S5, or I'm using a regular S1. Both amazing macro tools.
Yeah. So, looking at you touched on lenses there. So, what are your kind of go-to lenses that you find using for macro, or what kind of advice optic wise do you have for users that want to get into this?
Sure. First, I'm going to give you the non-conventional answer, and then I'll give you what you really wanted. Don't be discouraged by having a fixed lens or point and shoot camera, because the fact is you can close focus sometimes as close as a centimeter. Having a fixed lens camera means that you can get closer than almost anything I can talk to you about in terms of interchangeable lens. So don't think that's not an option, because for some things it really is. For focal length, I actually for the G series, I really like the 30 millimeter and the 45. They're both great. But here's my cheat, my pro tip. Quite honestly, things like the 100 to 400 and the 45 to 200 might give you close to macro performance. It's not a 1-to-1. But it allows me to get so close that I could get shots that I otherwise couldn't get. And I like things that will bite me, sting me, or run away. And I'm sorry, as much as I like, certain focal lengths, you aren't going to do that on a 10 to 25. I'm sorry.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
So, and I'm not one of those, when you see my photos, very light touch-ups, everything's done in nature. A lot of people in macro, I don't know if you know this, Sean, actually freeze their specimens. I'm not that guy. Yeah, I'm not that guy. So, yeah, sorry, I don't care. I'm not going to do that. So I need that reach. That's a huge feature for me. And that's why I like, the long telephoto lengths for sure. Because I like natural behavior too. I actually shoot in burst. I'm one of the few people in macro who shoots in burst because I like the ability to get repeated shots. Additionally, if I'm going to go for the S series, I really like so I think most people would be happiest with the 24 to 60 because it's so close, and it's really flexible and light. I actually use the 24 to 105, and I actually have been playing with the 2 Sigma macros, the 70 and the 105, and I just got the 105 on Saturday.
Yeah.
And and I like them both. I think that's the beauty of the L mount is, much like the micro 4/3, we got so many options. I really like the 105 focal length. It's a huge feature to me. I'm looking forward to when it stops raining, using some teleconverters on it too.
Very cool. Yeah. So there's a couple of questions that have actually come through before we go into actually looking at some of the images and kind of breaking them down here. But when you're working for your macro work, are you using a tripod often, or are you handheld a lot of times?
Depends on the camera. So for G series, I'm almost always handheld, and I never thought I could do that But remember, when you're getting a smaller sensor, there's no better or worse. There's give and take. This is physics. So when on a smaller sensor, I can actually move the sensor easier in the mount, so I can get handheld results really, really pretty well. Also, I'm not fighting depth of field, so I need less attempts. For the S series, I'm definitely using a monopod or a tripod. If I can get away with a monopod, I do that. If I'm using a tripod, I make sure I used a geared head. I love the ability to reproduce what a geared head gives me. Highly recommended, because there's nothing worse than having to slightly adjust it and then you've moved off your focal plane.
Yeah, I've tried some macro photography in the past. It's kind of really just another one of those areas where, like, I just don't have the patience to do it. I stand in awe of those that have the patience to do, full-blown macro photography. So it's really cool actually here, like, seeing all the different tools and accessories that are out there for it.
And one thing I will say is everything you see here today is handheld. So I would rather have warts and all and have it be handheld, so you can see what you can really do with a little bit of patience and a little less caffeine than me.
Okay. Now, kind of continuing that, no one was asking this question here, but so looking with
you're asking it, Sean.
Yeah, I'm asking it. So with macro photography, I know that there are different kinds of accessories that you can use for macro photography. One of those being focus rails. Could you give some information for those that may not know when you would use something like that for macro?
So I think focus rails are amazing in the studio, and they're amazing for getting started. And what they're going to do is they're going to allow you to move forward and back on a focus plane. And that way you're going to get repeatable results. So you can adjust your depth of field by physical movement. That's way easier than trying to remember where exactly was I when I shot this. It's also nice because a lot of the ones, make sure you get one that's very fluid. And this really matters because this is a mechanical part. We have some great features in our cameras like focus bracketing. And what focus bracketing will allow you to do is take multiple exposures and combine them. Now, you're not combining in camera. I didn't say focus stacking. You didn't hear me say that. What focus bracketing will allow you to do is combine them hundreds of exposures into your computer and then combine them there. It's a great thing. But I love focus rails. Just get it fluid. Overspend, not underspend. If there is a focus rail that I find that you can find for less than $150, it's good. Thank you. Congratulations. However, bad focus rails jump forward and back, and it literally ruins your shot. So your patience will suffer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is we've covered a lot of different styles of photography over the last couple of weeks, and one of the consistent messages is typically, buy the right device. Don't cheap out just to get something that gets you through. If it takes maybe a little bit longer to save up to get the right piece of equipment for your job, it will pay dividends for years and years to come. I mean, because something like this, like a focus rail, it's not going to lose its value, and it's not going to be incompatible with another camera down the line. Cameras will come and go, and having the right support system is going to be the better way to plan this stuff.
My geared head is 5 years old. It works like the day I bought it.
Yeah, there you go. Now, Chaz over on Photo Plus Plus is asking, manual or autofocus when you're capturing your images?
Yes.
Could you elaborate?
Yeah. So there's the way I do it and the way I teach it, and they're slightly different things. I actually think you should manually focus most macro because you're going to be fighting depth of field, and then I always have to have constant preview on because you want to know where you're going to have that real depth, and that's going to be a key thing to learn. Learn your aperture. Learn what that does. It matters. And I shoot in manual, but I think most people in aperture priority for macro is great. Program when you get started, it's fine. The way I do this, Sean, this is a little bit differently, but I think this works really well. I manually focus, but I program the back AF button to AF on for AF lock. So what I do is I have the camera lock into the general place I want to be, and then I fine tune my autofocus or my manual focus. I turn my peak on to high. Now, most people are going to want on low because they can kind of see more of the image, but I'm kind of used to it now. And then I constantly change the color. So this morning there was a lot of red, so I turned it to blue. But yeah, I hit that back button to get me close, because here's the challenge in macro. People don't realize is the motors are incredibly precise and they're moving a lot of glass. They are not fast.
No, not at all.
So you want to have it get there for you and then fine tune. Otherwise, you're going to be focusing. Oh, the bird or the bug already moved.
Yeah. Yeah, and so with focus on true dedicated macro lenses, this is something actually you and I were talking about before. There's also the other thing to take into consideration, that if you're looking to do one-to-one macro with that lens that you're spending your money on, that's not one-to-one isn't available at all focus points, correct?
No, generally not. First of all, let's even step it back before we go there. Most cameras that are one-to-one. By the way, were you able to get that graphic, Sean, or not?
I'm actually pulling it up now. So as you give this demo,
cool. So here's my first thing. Remember, so if it says one-to-one, that means the object in real life is the same size and dimensionality on the sensor. If it's a zoom lens, it is not likely one-to-one. I'm sure someone can Google, the internet always wins, can find a one-to-one zoom macro lens, but the vast majority are not. So it's only one-to-one when you're very close to when you're focusing very close to the lens itself. Let's see if you can find it. By the way, Sean has a great mechanical keyboard. We should have a little bit more of that ambient noise. I like it, actually.
Yeah. This is actually my quieter keyboard too. So, short of lenses like, there's one of the kind of popular ones that I used to own was the 65 MPE. Lenses are typically not going to be, just like you said, one-to-one, true one-to-one macro, unless you are all the way at the closest.
It's going to be 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. I mean, yeah, it's going to keep dropping and dropping and dropping. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you need to know that if you want that 100% magnification, you have to be close. Yeah. And we're trying to find a graphic because, man, that thing is actually awesome.
Yeah, this is always that funny thing. So like I had the graphic up, I closed the channel because it's actually of the new Sigma lens, because it's surprising how much that actually changes. And while we're doing this actually, Jack, so for those that aren't necessarily looking at, say, one-to-one macro, there's also advantages with other kinds of lenses in the system. You touched on them before, the 20-16, the 24-105. So for those that want to get into macro or close-up photography, can you explain why those lenses are actually a pretty good path to start with?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not a snob about one-to-one. Some people really are. And Sean, wow, you and your 5-to-1. The one-to-one is a great thing to do for coins and jewelry, and where you need to have 100% scale. But at 50% macro, it's still very large on the sensor. And we've got so much resolution here, you can crop. That's a key thing. And what a 50% macro can be still very close focusing and very, very, very sharp. Now, the one knock I'll have on a dedicated macro lens is, you had Brandon a couple of weeks ago, and you had, he will tell you for portraits, they're not ideal lenses because they're designed not to be flattering. They're designed to be real. And a dedicated macro can be too sharp. It's very difficult to sharpen something and have it look good, but it's very easy to soften things. On a macro that's a dedicated macro, you'll probably have to soften it. So I like a 50% macro because I'm going to get a lot more zoom. I'm going to get zoom to begin with. And it's a Swiss Army knife. You don't always know that you're going to have a great macro opportunity, and not everyone's going to carry that in their bag. That's the key. So to have a lens that's 50% macro, like that 100 to 400 it's almost, it's not one to one. It's not even half of to one, but it's gets me where I need to go, and it's really, really sharp. The one thing you really notice is in studio environments, you just don't get that close focusing distance. So it's a little bit more frustrating for fine details, particularly for objects.
Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead.
And then the last thing is that because it's 50% macro, there's less generally glass to move. They're faster to focus. So I can do my video, my macro for video. If I'm autofocusing, it's going to be way more smooth and looking.
Yeah. So I am not able to find that picture that we were looking at before. So we're just going to move on from that one. But so I want to jump actually because there's a couple of questions that have actually come in, and we've kind of touched on some of these answers. But Leslie is asking, how do you know how many photos to take when you're stacking an image to make sure you have the whole range? And this is obviously in relation to macro. You had mentioned that you do some studio macro work. So
Yep.
what process do you go through to figure that out?
Unfortunately, there's no great rule of thumb. It's just practice and knowing your subject size. So the smaller it is, and the more times you're going to fight depth of field, the more images you're going to get. Generally speaking, I don't think in most, I'll do this for outdoors even. I don't think there's any situation where I'm going to need more than probably 12 to 20 images. Okay. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying if I was doing medical technology, for, that'd be different. If I needed to go do something that's a document of an object, that's different. I could go to 100 of them. But generally speaking, with modern sensors with no optical low pass filter, upper dozens, 12 to 20 is a great way to start. Okay. The other thing I can tell you is get more than you need. And remember not to have your aperture, because you remember to adjust your aperture in accordance to the stack. So, Sean, I have to ask you a really dumb question, but this is a question that most people don't realize, particularly if they have different backgrounds. Sean, are lenses the most sharp wide open?
No, they are not.
No, they could be beautiful. They could have great fall off, and they could have some great optical effects. But but what if I go to f/22? Are those always the sharpest, or is there kind of a disadvantage there too?
Yeah.
So you get
going
diffraction.
Too deep. Yep.
Yeah, you'll get what's called diffraction, where basically the rays of light hit at an angle that's not flattering to the sensor. The key here when you're taking there is to find the sweet spot of your lens. So you might be shooting at f/8. You might be shooting at 5/6. That could be perfectly fine. So it's more of timing the number of shots I'm taking in a conjunction to my aperture.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Oh, and then the other thing is, just so you know, if you are going to get into focus stacking, dedicated software. You can do this in the Creative Cloud, but it is not as optimized. It is much, much slower.
Yeah. I've actually had a lot of fun playing around with what's the one program? Helicon Focus.
Helicon is what I use. This is not an endorsement on behalf of Panasonic, but it works incredibly well for my needs. And it's, again, that speed that really helps. The other thing is, if you have a computer that has a SSD, it really matters. I don't know why this is, but make sure, here's the stupid pro tip from Jack's Mistakes. Make sure that you transfer everything to a fast drive when you've got 200 images. That really adds up in terms of complexity. Fast.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we jump over to look at some of those images, I just want to make a run through here because there's a couple of other questions that some people have been asking. They're slightly off topic, but we want to, obviously try to address as much as we can. Ruckus asks, "Why are you so amazing?" Because we are.
Sean went to school for that.
Yeah, sure. I was great in school with all this stuff. One of the other questions was actually from Cliff, was asking, how do you access the shutter count log on an S1? It's not a user selectable option in the camera. You have to send the camera in for service for that to be done safely. So unfortunately, there's not the way to do it that way. Another question here was actually from Neon, was asking, any chance we'll see some L-mount extension tubes from Macro? Now, I haven't looked, but I think there are L-mount extension tubes available, just not from Panasonic, not from Sigma, to my knowledge.
Yeah, they're. I've seen a couple. I've never used one, and they're technically not part of the L-mount alliance, I guess, but technically they would be mechanically compatible. Here's the challenge I'm going to tell you with extension tubes. It's very difficult to make an extension tube that's going to be as good as a modern optic. First of all, the number one challenge I find with extension tubes, and I'm not saying don't use them, I'm just saying know what you're doing, because sometimes you're going to get these weird effects. It's a lot of expensive tubes, especially cheap ones. They're not coated on the inside, so you're going to get lots of internal light reflection, and that's going to kill your sharpness. The second thing is, I am not aware of one for L-mount, but I'd be happy to be wrong, that supports autofocus. So that would kill the way I currently do a lot of my work, because I do like the ability of the autofocus motor to get me close and then to dial in. The last thing I'd mention is, remember, if they do autofocus, they'll be a little bit slower just because macros are not very fast. And then you have another object you're having to push that through.
Yeah.
So key thing, open it up. If you're going to buy one, open on, look inside, make sure it's coated black and it's not reflective. Unless you want to take, ghost hunter macros. If that's what you're into, man, it's a good way to do it.
Definitely good point. Good point. So, yeah, let's actually jump over and take a look at some of the images here. So, for the macro conversation we've got here, I've got a couple images that you sent over, and I think this is a good point to, kind of remind everybody that macro, just because you have an interchangeable lens camera doesn't mean that that's the only option that you have for macro photography. A lot of point and shoot cameras have flexibility for macro focus as well. So I wanted to pick a couple of these images before we jump over to the light painting and live composite conversation. But could you kind of cover? Let's actually look at the.
No, we're going to go back for a second, Sean, because this is why me being a prima donna. The reason why I chose this is, how many times have you heard the FZ2500 is a video camera?
Mm-hmm. All the time.
That's a still image. Having a small sensor means that, and this is an inch, so it's still pretty big. It's 4 times the size of a point and shoot. It means I can control depth of field. You can actually see me in the reflection under this Radiard slider's eye. And that's handheld. And I couldn't have gotten that on a lot of cameras. But go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry. I like to point that out.
Yeah, no. And that's actually what I was kind of going for, is that, with a lot of the point and shoots, because of the way they're designed with the fixed lens elements, you have a fully capable macro camera at your disposal immediately. That's an advantage of getting into this when you start working with the point and shoot series. And then you can advance up, obviously. So like the next image here of the spider you had, this one is on the G100, it says here.
Yeah, it's the G100. And again, that's the idea where I use this example. This is not 100% macro. And if it was 100% macro, it would be about twice the size. But it still got me a really good look. What I really liked here is I like the fall off and I lighted the reflection. And that's really what the forest is like. So you got to make a choice. Sometimes macro, and I'm very guilty of this. You can see my framing. I get too close. But sometimes you lose what you're trying to do there. As I wanted to get the spider to be part of the scene. And the G100 did a great job here because, again, there's no optical low pass filter. There's a reason why this is, and to me, that's a key feature.
Yeah. And then we continue on, there's more of that kind of conversation of, thinking that macro has to be that 1-to-1. And I think you and I both kind of have that same logic that macro doesn't necessarily need to be 1-to-1. Yes, there's a talent and there's an experience for doing that, but close focus and using something to get as close as you can to a subject for the highest magnification that you can, like this example really comes from lenses that you wouldn't necessarily be expecting for that to come from.
No, that's a GX85 with a 100 or 400.
Yeah,
and this is an example where I wouldn't have gotten this shot otherwise. It's a sacred, basically temple, and they put coins in the mouth of the statue. And I'm taking a photo. I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to change that. That's I'm an observer, and that got me a shot that I wouldn't otherwise get. And I still can get that. The background to be beautiful and all that sharpness.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's also cool is that, so this one isn't even all the way out at the 400 millimeter. So it shows you, again, that, in my opinion, always kind of the advantage of Micro Four Thirds for this kind of stuff is because, yes, you're going to get a much tighter field of view, but the optics are still designed physically as a 100 to 400. So the close focus distance is infinitely closer than that on and like a 35 millimeter 100 to 400. So you are able to get this close.
And plenty of resolution.
Yeah. And then, so when we start looking over here, I know there's a lot of people that have been asking about, actually, I want to jump over to some of the S series before we have to move on topic-wise. There's a lot of people that ask about, full frame S series macro photography. So this image, could you give us a little info on what this was
Sure.
done with?
Sure. This is an S5. This is the 100 to 400, and this is me doing dragonflies. And what this gives me is just incredible resolution to work with, great stabilization, and this was handheld. You can't, at least in my experience, I can't use a tripod for dragonflies because by the time you move your tripod to where they are, they're going to fly away and then move somewhere else. So you got to handhold it. That's the only way you can do this, and you just got incredible detail across the frame.
Yeah. No, so I mean, yeah, that's a couple of those really cool tips. Now, before we jump over to, because I actually have to watch time because I always forget that we always end up running really long on specific topics before having to move to the next one. So, let's get a couple of the questions that were in here. About it. Just a reminder for anyone that's over on YouTube, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras if you have a question for us to address during this stream. So there's a couple in here that don't have the at Lumix on there. Terry was asking,
do that for Sean. Always do the at Lumix. It's so hard for Sean to find them.
So let's see. Terry's asking what lens on the Dragon and the settings, which we kind of covered a bit, but I will jump back actually to that Dragon so that you can see the EXIF data that was on there. Because Jack was really cool at actually providing us the EXIF data. So yeah, this was the GX85, and looks like you had the 100 to 400 at 128 millimeter. So yeah. Get some pretty cool, nice shallow depth of field on a micro four thirds camera there.
It's all about understanding distance. That's the key.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what else we've got here. Let's look at the Photo Plus platform. What kind of questions came up? Manual focus adapted glass versus L mount. I know I have my opinions on this. I'd like to hear your opinions first, honestly, though, for using manual focus adapted glass.
Manual focus adapted glass for macro is great in the studio. It's not great in the field.
There you go.
And you're talking to someone who owns dozens of macro lenses. I own every macro lens that I'm aware of, except for one for micro four thirds. I own a couple of L mount macros now, and all in FD glass. All sorts of other stuff. The challenge with that is, again, dual stabilization will change your life if you're handheld. That is not me trying to plug a feature. That's me getting better shots. The ability, if Sean and I were going to go move a box into his apartment right there, let's say we need more lights for him. He needs more lights. He would get one end of the box. I would get the other end of the box, and we'd work together to deliver it. And that's what the body and the lens are doing together simultaneously. Secondly, I like EXIF data, and most manual focus lenses won't have that. Secondly, I can't bracket focus on a manual focus lens. There's no way to be able to do it because there's no motor control. Now, are there exceptions to that rule? Absolutely. If you want to get a more than 1-to-1 magnification, you're going to get started in the amateur side of being a microscope lens. Yeah, absolutely. Go get a larger lens. Go get the lens that Sean talked about. It will work fine with an EF adapter, but it's really difficult in the field. And as you get to higher magnifications, handholding becomes nearly impossible. And then you start thinking about more light. This is one of those things where absolutely positively you can get a high magnification lens, but you're going to have to think of a light source. Now, we got plenty of flash supports. You can work out that's what you want, but you're going to need external lighting. For these photos, I don't tend to like to use them because again, Sean, I'm a weirdo. I don't like to spook the bug, and you're exposing them to more light than they'd ever normally see.
Yeah. So yeah, some good points there. Looking at the style of photography that you want to get into for macro, adapted glass, I pretty much have the same opinion as Jack on this. It's a great way to get into it because usually you can find adapted lenses for really inexpensive. But to Jack's point, know the limitations. Know that macro lenses or any lens that's going to be manually controlled, you're not going to have a lot of the support structure that cameras offer that really make it more enjoyable to work with, and also gives you that higher probability of getting the image you want to actually capture.
I And
So
if I
yeah,
couldn't push this A off on button to get me close, it just takes so much more time. Literally, that's what spoiled me to it.
yeah, yeah. All right, so let's see. We got 2 more questions that were in here about macro, and then we're gonna jump over to talking about Live-Composite. Jeff is asking focus stacking, Photoshop versus Helicon. We touched on this before, but I know you know just like you were saying with Photoshop, it's a very involved process to do focus stacking in Photoshop, especially if you're not accustomed to it. But you've worked with Helicon, right?
Yeah, and what I would say is it's not efficient. So if that's what you want to get started with, it's like getting started with like Photoshop Elements versus another program. There's nothing wrong with getting started with a tool you have. It's better to get started that way than not get started at all. However, it's really, in my opinion, mathematically speaking, much slower in the way Photoshop works with images. The analogy I would give you, because Sean's a gamer and maybe some other people have gamed in the past, it's the difference between with Helicon working with a graphics card versus integrated graphics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so much faster. And if you make a mistake, re-rendering everything in Photoshop takes a very long time, whereas Helicon, it is scary fast. And there are others, there are other free options. I mean, that you can try as well. So try those too. But dedicated software that only has to deal with one type of image math, so much better also if you need to do fixing of things.
Yeah, and stuff like Helicon, and yes, again, we're harping on Helicon because it's the one that I think both of us are most familiar with. And as he said, there's a ton of other ones out there that
There's
you
Serene
can use.
Stacker, which is the other big one. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, Serene Stacker works great.
Yeah, and in most cases, they also have much better algorithms for doing these kinds of stacks, depending on the type of stack that you're doing. So your results are going to be a lot better out of it. And I know for a fact that something like Helicon even accepts if you're someone who utilizes the post-focus functionality in some of our cameras. You can take that MP4 file that comes out of the camera, drop it into the software, and it automatically pulls the frames out of it. So it does become a plug-and-play option for those that want to get into it. And it's truly not that expensive as a software. I mean, software in general, it's not a subscription-based, at least the last I checked it. So those that are against subscription-based could be an option. And I see a lot of people are also sounding off in the chat that Affinity Photo seems to do some pretty good focus stacking. So if you're ever looking for that kind of software, that's one of the other reasons why we love doing these kinds of events, because you'll find like-minded photographers who may be able to point you in a direction, because there's only so much Jack and I know about all these topics. We do educate ourselves on the different topics that we're going to talk about, and usually we're talking about things that we are passionate about ourselves. But there's always someone in the chat that can blow all of our knowledge out of the water with a lot of this stuff. So make friends in the chat, connect with people that seem to be in the same direction you're looking at, and it'll pay itself off in the end. So so let's actually jump over to looking at some of the Live-Composite functionality, because we got about 20 minutes left in the session. So for those that don't know what Live-Composite is, and this is gonna kind of blend in with light painting, it's a function in our S5 and also in the G95 where you can take a long exposure image while actually having it build in the camera, so you're not going to run into situations where the whole skyline of a nightscape is blown out. Or if you're trying to do light painting, it's not just kind of guessing how long you need to run the exposure for to capture everything. You can actually watch this physically build before your eyes on the camera. And I had gone out a couple nights ago, actually, and created, with Live-Composite, some of these images actually from downtown Austin here. So I'll turn my other camera on so you guys can see this as well. So for those that have done astrophotography or nighttime photography where you're trying to capture the stars and also a landscape, you know that the challenge is blending all of your exposures together. So with this capability in the camera, you're able to actually tell the camera to do a base exposure. So something like, let's pull up this one actually. So what you can do with this is say, this is in the middle of downtown Austin. I'm going to go into my develop settings and actually just reset this image. Although save out my settings because I like the way that one edited. So I can set this shot up. I can tell the camera to capture a base image, which in this case is 0.6 of a second at ISO 400, using an ultra-wide adapted lens on my S5. What it'll do then is the first image sets what your brightest highlight point is. So in this case, set the exposure for the building here and about as bright as I'd be comfortable with on the sign for this shot. Then when you click the shutter again, it's just going to keep adding the new brightness to the image. So where this comes into play for astrophotography, and this is the same thing for light painting as well, is that I can start doing things like pull my highlights down because the dynamic range on the S5 is pretty stellar. I've got tons of dynamic range to play with in the highlights and shadows. I can come in and adjust my shadows a bit so I can start pulling out those stars from up in the sky. And then I also have the, more ability to do some other kind of editing to get it corrected. This image itself was obviously also distortion corrected because it was a fisheye lens. But where this comes in is that traditionally, if you've seen astro-style shots in the middle of a city, most people are capturing those images and they're doing sky replacements. So they're taking another photo, say like I would take the sky from this image, and then go into my city, and then I would paint out the crane, the buildings, and then I would just place that sky on top of this. And that gives you a cool look, but there's something cool about being able to take an image that looks like this right from the camera, being able to edit it, get it nice the way you want it, and know that all of this was done in camera in a single session. So this is a base exposure of 2.5 seconds, 1600 ISO, which gave me the exposure for under the bridge, the shadows down here, obviously as you can see before I did all the corrections, all of the base exposures down in here, but then I let the camera run for 30 minutes to create an image like this. So you have so much flexibility to pull out all of those stars to create a new style of image that you may not have captured before. And this works for those that want to do pinpoint style of astrophotography as well. So I have a shot here which is pinpointed stars. Well, relatively. I was a little off on my calculations here. But knowing how long of a shutter you can have for stars like this, while also still trying to maintain the brightness down here, can cause some challenges. A shot like this with a lens that I'm using, which was an 11mm fisheye, by calculation, I could be doing a 45-second exposure to still have pinpointed stars in the sky, and I'd be perfectly fine with it. But if I were to do that without using Live-Composite, the foreground here will be totally blown out. The city skyline will be more blown out than it is here. So instead, I can go in, set my exposure so that my highlights are the way I want them in the city skyline, the foreground is exposed properly, and then just let the camera build up to that 45 or 50 seconds that, my calculation's letting me select for pinpoints, and then get the result of the images with the stars in the sky. The other thing that you get to notice with Live View Composite is that if you run into situations here, so you've got some light painting going on with the cars, and the one guy that decided to, in the middle of the shot, go do some donuts in this parking lot in front of me, you're able to see the effect of any of the lights while you're capturing. So it doesn't become something that, an hour later after the camera's exposed, that you go look at and say, all right, well, someone drove through my shot. Now that's not how I want it. So now I have to redo an entire extra hour worth of shooting. The second I see lights on the horizon, I can start seeing what they're going to do to my image, and I can either stop it or cover it with a jacket or something that protects the lens and the exposure from seeing that additional light come in. But it also shows you where situations like this, the stars. you'll be able to see, there's kind of, at least the way I explain it, there's no middle ground when it comes to star trails. It's either you shoot for pinpoints or you shoot for decently long trails of light. The middle of the road exposures, kind of like this one, it doesn't really look that great. It becomes kind of distracting because it just appears as motion blur in the sky instead of these long sweeping star trails through the sky that you're looking at. Where here, again, I could have gone a heck of a lot longer to really kind of bring these stars through, but at 20 to 30 minutes, that's all you get with this lens, because the wider you go, the longer it takes for the star to transverse through those pixels. So you start to be able to see this stuff build and grow with it as you're trying to expand your nighttime photography. So that's my little bit of a diatribe on astrophotography and live view composite. Let's see what kind of questions we've got.
Can Jack from Houston ask a question?
Of course you can. Question from Jack in Houston.
Yeah. So what cameras support live composite? Because I think that's one of the number one questions I get out in the field, and people forget one of them.
Yeah. So live composite, and I know exactly what you're saying because I forgot it too. So
you did actually, and that's and
I actually work for the company. So yes, the S5 in the full frame. This is the first full frame mirrorless camera that offers live view composite.
Okay.
There's the G95, which is our kind of middle of the road between a G85 and a G9. That one supports it. And I believe the one I keep forgetting is the G100, right?
Yeah, absolutely, the G100. And what's so cool about this is Sean's the expert at this. I don't claim to be an expert in live composite, but like in our own team, like Brandon, he was on a couple of weeks ago. His wife Lynn is doing her first live composite with the G100, and like, it's one of those things where it's so easy, you get reproducible results every time.
Yeah. So And obviously with those of you out there asking, unfortunately, this is not something that's in cameras like the S1R, the S1, S1H, or some of the other Lumix cameras. We are asking. This is a new feature brought into Panasonic Lumix, though for those of you that use other camera brands, specifically in the Micro Four Thirds realm, it's not necessarily new. There are versions of this in some other cameras, but I know that a lot of us have been asking for this to be brought into some other cameras if possible. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, like we've said before, if you guys have more questions about about live composite or some of the other focus stacking stuff, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will get back to those. But I know for the last about 10 minutes that we've got here for this session, we wanted to cover some of the updates that came with the firmware update that was released last night. And with that, I actually want to tie this in with some of that macro photography that we've been talking about as well, because Jack, you and I were talking about the Tether software that's available.
Now, which Tether software would that be, Sean? Because that's one of the coolest things that I wanted to bring up, is that we have so many options. Again, this is all about the right tool for the right job. And yeah, absolutely. We've got Lumix Tether. We've got Lumix Tether for multicam. And then we've got even more. Yeah.
So for those that are working when you've got, say, you're not at a computer, you're not going to be hard tethered into a desktop or a laptop, you have Lumix Sync and Lumix Image App, which are the mobile versions of our software for control of the different cameras. Basically, rule of thumb, any new camera that's come out in the last year and a half, I'd say, is a safe bet. In the last year and a half, they're going to be using the Lumix Sync app, which is the new version, and it is both iOS and Android for those that are obviously Apple or Android. Unfortunately, there's no Windows Phone, so I'm sorry for anyone that's using a Windows Phone anymore. But yeah, those are your go-to mobile applications for this. But then when it comes to desktop, as Jack said, there's a couple different solutions for you, and I think some people may be a little confused out there. I don't know. Would you say that's probably fairly true, Jack?
Yeah, I would. And it's a common question we get, and I think that's the idea is that we've given you lots of options. So, like Sean, you've been using regular Lumix Tether, gosh, in forever. I mean, and this is What's the difference between what's the difference between Lumix Tether and Lumix Tether for streaming? And then we've got another app?
Yeah. So Lumix Tether is the core software that we use. And as you can see now, I'm actually plugged into my box camera off to the side here so I can show you this interface. This is the core software that all of our equipment is actually based off of. So this is what allows us to do shutter speed, aperture control, all of the different functionalities to control the camera for capturing stills. So for someone that's doing, say, studio macro work, this can be an invaluable tool.
Yeah, this is what I use.
Yeah. It lets you select your focus. So I'm in manual focus right now on that camera, so I can show you the focusing aids. You see that you get focus peaking. Like Jack was saying, there are situations where you actually want to change the color of the focus peaking. And that will really depend on the scenario that you're shooting at. You may find that blue isn't, good for your eyes. You want to use something else. This lets you change all of that stuff. It also gives you the ability to zoom in for critical focusing, so you can see the pores on the side of my face. If I stare at the camera, it just looks really creepy because you have just a crop in of my eyes.
I like the peaking, Sean, your blue beard, literally.
Yeah. But also, this is where you also have control for focus. So I can come in here and I can fine-tune my focus to really allow me that precision that you need for, and Mr. Matt Frazier's calling me, so I'm going to cancel that. Every Tuesday I'm on a session, and Matt wants to try to find a way to get into this. So
I thought he didn't like you.
Well, So, with this software, you get a ton of control for this. You have all of these capabilities for capturing all of the different images. And for those that do work remotely, so if you're working off camera onto a laptop or desktop, you do also have the ability that you can save images right out to the memory card and also to your computer. So you always will have an immediate backup of that file. So it becomes incredibly useful. For those that are looking at streaming, as Jack mentioned, there's also Lumix Tether for streaming, which is the same basic interface as this. However, you have just another option up here, which will remove all the UI on this, and it becomes a window capture for different software like OBS, things like that. Now, truth be told, Lumix Tether for streaming was kind of a middle-of-the-road software. Our update with the webcam utility kind of makes it obsolete for that style of filming, so there's not really a big need to use this. Using the webcam software is definitely going to be the preferred method for a lot of people, which, to tie in, is actually one of the firmware updates that came out last night. The Lumix G100, so our compact little camera here, this one now can do web streaming with the Lumix Tether for multicam software. Release just over USB. So you can plug that in, you're set, ready to go. I'm actually going to get off this feed because it's a little distracting for me to see the side of my head talking. I keep wanting to turn like that.
And can I also just mention, just so everyone's clear, make sure you update your firmware and download the software. If you just download the software, it won't recognize. So you need to have that firmware first, and then you can use the software.
Exactly. And hang on in the chat. We will drop a link to the firmware download page, so you guys will be able to grab all of these updates. So yeah, with all these different software options, you have a couple of different ways that you can control these cameras. Now, all of that's great, but the updates really brought a ton of new functionality for a lot of the cameras. The top tier of this, for anyone that's out there that's a Lumix S5 owner, it's the fact that now with the Atomos Ninja 5, you have the capability to record to the Ninja 5 over HDMI for ProRes RAW functionality. Now, this does need a version 2.0 firmware update in the camera, and you do want to make sure that the firmware is updated in your Ninja 5 to, I think it's 10.55 right now, so that everything works pretty much the way it should. You're going to get your ISO control, you're going to get your exposure variance control, so you definitely want to make sure you have all that stuff updated. I know a lot of people have been asking questions about HDMI cables for the S5. I use these little guys. They're inexpensive, they're lightweight and thin, so you don't have to worry too much about the HDMI port. These are a pretty solid option. You just want to make sure that they're rated for, I think, 18 gigabit would be ideal for data transfer, because ProRes RAW HQ is a fairly large data throughput, and the data throughput is what you need on an HDMI cable for RAW over HDMI. So you'll have, that's the big update. The other major updates was that the S1R, so our traditionally, number one photography-focused camera, got some well-deserved video love for those that are wanting to get in and utilize a high-resolution camera as well. The S1R now can record 5K up to 30p internally. It does it in a 420 10-bit color space and bit depth. And you also now have the ability to use the hybrid log gamma color profile for HDR capabilities with that particular mode. So super it is cool. An MOV. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Now, for those that also want to understand it, the 5K that's on the S1R is not a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's 5K pixel to pixel. I believe it is a 4:3 aspect ratio. I've not actually checked it. But you get such a large platform to work with that you can then do your crop into, you can downscale it in for 4K, for 1080. So it really gives you a big bump up. And actually on the S1R, one of the other things that was actually not necessarily really covered too in depth is that you now also have 10-bit over HDMI for Cinema 4K 60p. So if you're someone who's been using an S1R and you're really working where you want to start getting into more video, this update's a really solid option for you if you want to start balancing out some more of your work there. All the cameras in the S series now also fully across a unified platform support shutter speed, shutter angle. So for those that want to actually shoot in degrees instead of shutter speed, you've got that flexibility now. And for those, I know everybody is very, very polarized on the vertical filming take out there. All the cameras can now also tag the video properly if you're filming vertically for a client. That when you bring it into something like Premiere or Final Cut, that video will already be vertical. So you're not having to go through the process of rotating it and then working with the file there. So it all speeds a lot of this stuff up throughout the entire process that you're working on.
Can I get one plug also? On the S5, there's a new monochrome. There are new picture profiles. And there is a new monochrome mode. And it is fantastic. So this is going to be L monochrome S. So definitely amazing black and white. We really listen to what our customers are looking for. I know we get a lot of questions about photography as well as video. So definitely check it out because it's literally my new favorite monochrome profile.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other profile that was added in is the L Classic Neo, which if you're someone who likes that kind of, I think how to describe it, maybe more of like a milky-ish kind of color photograph, this is one of the more fun color profiles I think we've added in. And, it's funny, with all of the big, heavy technical stuff that we've released in these cameras, I find myself really enjoying the small little things that have been added, like red frame record, the shutter angle, things like that, since I'm jumping around with all this stuff so much. Yeah. So, trying to look here. Doesn't look like we have too many more questions out there. I know that a couple other people's... are there any more telezooms in the pipeline that's coming from Bob over on YouTube? Yeah, we have a 70-300 that's we announced is under development and should be coming soon.
And that's for the L mount.
Yeah, that's for L mount. We don't have any information on Micro Four Thirds lenses or anything like that coming out. So unfortunately, guys, we don't have any info on that for you guys here. Let's see here. Judy asks, do all the Lumix cameras use the firmware update? So the way firmware updates are done is by specific cameras. So we will drop the link in the chat here so that you guys can see the updates. and you can get them for your specific camera. So aside from that, we are actually at the time limit now for this session. I want to remind everybody that we do go live every week, but now that our weekly changeover throughout the month of November is coming to an end with this session, we will be returning next week to Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So back to our standard time for the Lumix Live platform. We'll have probably another couple of events that will happen on the Tuesdays, so you're going to want to make sure that you get subscribed, that you like the videos, follow us here on Panasonic Lumix, on the YouTube channel, follow us over on the Photo++ platform. It is ongoing after the month of November, so make sure to check that out. Once I'm done with this part and we're on the end card, I'll make sure to drop the links in the chat. So hang around for a few more minutes right after we wrap this up so you guys will get some information there. And with that, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. We will have next week's session Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time is our Ask Us Anything session. And we actually have a new way for you guys to get us questions specifically for those sessions. So we have created a new email address that I get access to so that you guys can email us your questions in detail. Through the feedback that everyone has given us, there has been a lot of requests for a more kind of formalized way to get us questions. So our team has worked on this. We've created the new email address, and when you work in a big company, you know that that's a process to get an email address created, but we have one. I will drop that email address in the chat here. So feel free to send us an email with the question that you want us to address on the stream. And for each of our AMA sessions, and probably throughout the sessions moving forward, if we get a large number of them, we'll pick a few of them and go through it. So again, I will leave that email address in the chat in a minute once we get done with this so I can actually see my keyboard type. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jack, for joining me. This was another fun session as always.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. And yeah, should be a fun session. So make sure to hit the like button, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff on YouTube. It helps us out. You know the deal. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.